This presentation will cover a variety of information concerning claims of beneficial use for transfers. We will discuss what a claim is and what needs to be included in the claim. We will also provide tips and reminders to aid in the completion of the claim report and map. During this presentation, you will see and hear a variety of words, phrases, and abbreviations that are unique to the discussion of water rights. Here are a few of those that we will most commonly be using. Claim, CBU, COBU. These are all short for Claim of Beneficial Use. We will define what a claim of beneficial use is as we get further into this presentation. C-date. The date by which the changes authorized by a transfer final order are required to be completed by. The date will be specifically identified in the order and may appear as being October 1st of a specific year. You will need to read the transfer final order and any associated extensions of time final orders to determine what the C-date is for a specific transfer. ODFW, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. POA. POA is an abbreviation for Point of Appropriation. A point of appropriation is generally described as the point where groundwater is appropriated. A point of appropriation is typically a well or on a sump. POD. POD is the abbreviation for Point of Diversion. A point of diversion is generally described as the point where surface water is appropriated. A point of diversion is typically located on a stream, reservoir, spring, or lake. POU. POU stands for Place of Use. The place of use of a water right is commonly described to the quarter level, which is 40 acres within a section, but can also be described as being located within a government lot, a portion of a quarter, such as the north half of a quarter, a tax lot within a quarter, a full section or portion of a section, such as the north half of section 10, or as within the boundaries of a city. Transfer final order. The order issued to approve a change or changes to a water right or rights. WRD or OWRD, the Oregon Water Resources Department. RIS, the Water Rights Information System. The RIS system is where you can search for information about water rights and access electronic copies of the water right documents. As previously mentioned, here is a more in-depth definition of what a claim of beneficial use is for a transfer. A claim includes both a report and map. The report provides the following: a description of the authorized change or changes, and a description as to the extent that those changes were completed. This could be the number of acres of irrigation developed at a new place of use, the rate of water developed at the new point of diversion or point of appropriation, or a description of the uses that were developed. In the case of a change in point of diversion or appropriation, or the addition of a point of diversion or point of appropriation, a description of the new point of diversion, including the theoretical calculations to demonstrate the capacity at that new point. In addition, the claim will provide information to demonstrate timely compliance with conditions such as meter or measuring device installation, fish protection device installation and ODFW approval letter, well repair requirements, and any other transfer-specific conditions. If conditions are not timely complied with, the department may move to cancel the transfer for failure to complete the changes. The claim map identifies the developed locations of the use or uses, point of diversion or point of appropriation, the location of measuring devices and fish protection devices as required in the transfer final order. Beneficial use is described differently for permits and transfers. For transfer, beneficial use is described as follows: the completion of the authorized change or changes while complying with conditions of the transfer. Simply put, completion of the change or changes plus compliance equals beneficial use. Completion of the change or changes without compliance does not equal beneficial use. Again, most conditions are time sensitive. What that means is that compliance with conditions must occur between the date the transfer final order is issued and the completion date of the transfer as established in the final order or as may have been extended through an extension of time final order. In the case of a transfer, the claim only needs to address the change or changes that were authorized. For this purpose, specific claim forms have been developed for the various types of transfers that the department issues. These forms can be found on the Forms page or through a link on the Resources page for water right examiners. When beginning any project that requires the use of department forms, always download the most current form from our website. The following slides will discuss the various types of changes and what a claim for that change or changes requires. When a transfer only authorizes a change in point of diversion or appropriation, the claim will only need to describe the new point or points of diversion. The claim form will direct the CWRE to provide information about the new point that will establish the capacity of the point, as well as information about how and when conditions of the transfer were met. The description of the point of diversion or appropriation will include information necessary to establish the capacity of the ditch or gravity flow pipe at the point of diversion, or the pump that's used at the point of diversion or appropriation. The claim map submitted for this type of change needs to identify the developed location of the new point of diversion or appropriation. The place of use served by the new point does not need to be resurveyed. The location of the place of use was determined at the time of the issuance of the transfer final order. The claim map should reflect the place of use as authorized by the final order, as no changes of place of use were authorized. In general, the possible reductions at the time of certification of a transfer involving only a change in point of diversion or appropriation is a reduction in the rate to the developed capacity of the new point of diversion. If multiple points of diversion were authorized and conditions of the transfer were not met at each point, it is possible that the point for which conditions were not met would be excluded from a proposed certificate. When a transfer only authorizes an additional point of diversion or appropriation, the claim will only need to describe the additional point or points of diversion or appropriation. The claim form will direct the CWRE to provide information about the additional point that will establish the capacity of the point, as well as information about how and when conditions of the transfer were met. The description of the point of diversion will include information necessary to establish the capacity of the ditch or gravity flow pipe at the point of diversion, or the pump used at the additional point of diversion or appropriation. The claim map submitted for this type of change needs to identify the developed location of the additional point of diversion. The original point or points of diversion and the place of use served by the new point does not need to be resurveyed for location, as they were determined at the time of the issuance of the transfer final order. The claim map should reflect the original points of diversion and place of use as authorized and described by the transfer final order. In general, the possible reductions at the time of certification of a transfer involving only the addition of a point of diversion or appropriation is a reduction in the rate due to the capacity at that new point or points of diversion. If multiple additional points were authorized and conditions of the transfer were not met at each point, it is possible that the point for which conditions were not met would be excluded from the proposed certificate. In addition, if the transfer final order included conditions that applied to both the additional points and the original points, and conditions were not met at the original points, It is possible that the original point for which conditions were not met would also be excluded from the proposed certificate. When a transfer only authorizes a change in place of use, the claim will only need to describe the extent to which the change of the place of use was completed. The claim form will direct the water right examiner to provide information about the use at the new location. In the case of irrigation or nursery use, the claim will need to identify the number of acres allowed to be moved and how many acres were developed at the new place of use. The claim must address all conditions in the transfer final order, including providing the date that the change in the place of use was completed. As with any condition, this date must fall between the date the transfer final order was issued and the C date. The claim map submitted for this type of change needs to identify the developed location of the new place of use. In the case of irrigation or nursery, the map must indicate the number of acres as required by our Division 14 rules. The authorized point or points of diversion or appropriation that are used to serve the new place of use do not need to be surveyed, as they were determined at the time of the issuance of the transfer final order. The claim map should reflect the original point or points of diversion as authorized by the transfer final order. Possible reductions at the time of certification of a transfer involving only a change in place of use would be a reduction in the number of acres of irrigation or nursery use, or a reduced place of use based on what is reported in the claim. It is possible that the instantaneous rate of water could be reduced based on the authorized limitation from the originating water right. Those reductions would be based on rate limits such as 1/40th, 1/80th, or some other similar limitation. When a transfer only authorizes a change in character of use, the claim will only need to describe that the newly authorized use was timely made and that any conditions of the transfer final order were also timely complied with. The claim form will direct the water right examiner to provide information about the new use, specifically when water was used for that new use. The claim must address all conditions of the transfer final order, including providing the date that the new use was made. As with any other conditions, the date that the new use was made must fall between the date the transfer final order was issued and the C date. The claim map submitted for this type of change will not require that either the place of use, points of diversion, or points of appropriation be surveyed. The authorized place of use and points of diversion or appropriation do not need to be surveyed as they were determined at the time of the issuance of the transfer final order. As for possible reductions, if the transfer final order authorized multiple new characters of use and not all of the uses were developed, any newly authorized uses not made would not be included in the proposed certificate. When a transfer only authorizes a change in character of use of a reservoir, the claim will need to provide the date that the water was stored for the new purpose. In addition, timely compliance with any conditions included in the transfer final order will also need to be described. The claim form will direct the water right examiner to provide the date that the storage of water was made for the new character of use and to describe compliance with any conditions of the order. Both the storage of water for the new use and compliance with any conditions must occur between the date the transfer final order was issued and the completion date. The claim map submitted for this type of change will not require that either the reservoir footprint or points of diversion or appropriation be surveyed. The authorized place of use and points of diversion or appropriation do not need to be surveyed as they were determined at the time of the issuance of the transfer final order. It is unlikely that there will be any reductions for this type of change. following series of slides describe what will be required in a claim for a transfer that involves multiple changes. In general, claims for transfers that involve multiple changes will require that each of the authorized changes be described in the claim. For this example, the transfer authorized both a new point of diversion and a new place of use. The claim will require that both the new point of diversion as well as the new place of use be described, and any conditions included in the transfer final order be addressed. The mapping requirement for this type of claim would include mapping both the new point of diversion and the new place of use based on their developed locations. Here is a second example of a transfer that involves multiple changes. For this example, the transfer authorized both an additional point of diversion and a new place of use. The claim will require that both the additional point of diversion as well as the new place of use be described, and any conditions included in the transfer final order must be addressed. The mapping requirement for this type of claim would include mapping both the additional point of diversion and the new place of use based on the developed location of each. The original point or points of diversion do not need to be resurveyed for location, as they were determined at the time of the issuance of the transfer final order. The claim should reflect the original point or points of diversion as authorized and described by the transfer final order. Here is our final example. In this example, the transfer authorized a new point of diversion, a new place of use, and a change in the character of use. The claim will require that the new point of diversion, the new place of use, and the new character of use be described, as well as any conditions that were included in the transfer final order. The mapping requirement for this type of change would include mapping both the new point of diversion and the new place of use based on the developed locations of each. To summarize, the purpose of a claim of beneficial use for a transfer is to describe that the authorized change or changes were timely completed, to describe the extent that the changes were completed, and to document that conditions required in the order were timely met. In general, transfers are issued to allow the following types of changes: a change in point of diversion or appropriation, the addition of a point of diversion or appropriation, a change in the place of use, or a change in the character of use. In addition, a combination of any or all of the above could be included in a single transfer. The department has created claim forms to accommodate the different combinations of claims that you may be submitting for a transfer. Please check the Forms page to locate the transfer claim form. Should a claim be submitted, or is an extension of time needed? This is one of the first questions that should be asked. One major question to consider when working with a transfer holder is whether they are ready to have a claim completed, or if they need an extension of time in order to complete their development or comply with conditions. In other words, has beneficial use been completed under the transfer, or is additional time needed to complete the change? I have found that one of the simplest methods to determine whether the change has been completed is to use a timeline and plot the development of changes authorized under the transfer. Here is a timeline for a transfer. The beginning of the timeline is the date that the transfer was issued, and the end of the timeline is the date by which the authorized change was required to be completed by, also referred to as the C date. Again, this example identifies what an ideal timeline would look like. This example is for a transfer that authorized both a change in point of diversion and a change in place of use. It shows that between the date that the transfer order was issued and the date required for the changes to be completed by, the C date, the transfer holder developed the new point of diversion and installed the required fish protection devices and water measurement device, and irrigated the new place of use. Following the completion of the beneficial use, The transfer holder hired a certified water right examiner who prepared a claim of beneficial use, which was then submitted to the department within 1 year following the C date. Here is a second timeline for a transfer. In this case, you can see that the lands at the new place of use were irrigated after the completion date of the transfer. In this situation, the submittal and approval of an extension of time would be recommended prior to the submittal of the claim. If a claim was to be submitted that documented that irrigation of the new place of use occurred after the authorized completion date, the department would propose to cancel the transfer, which could lead to the loss of acres involved in the transfer. Here is an additional timeline for a transfer. In this case, you can see that the lands at the new place of use were timely irrigated, but the required flow meter was installed after the completion date of the transfer. In this situation, the submittal and approval of an extension of time would also be recommended prior to the submittal of the claim. If a claim were to be submitted that documented that the required flow meter was installed after the completion date, the department would propose to cancel the transfer, which could lead to the loss of the acres involved in the transfer. To summarize our discussion on should a claim be filed or should an extension be filed, if you find that a water user did not complete the change or comply with conditions within the time limits allowed in the transfer final order, an extension of time should be requested. If the department reviews a claim and finds that the change was not completed or conditions were not met within the authorized time period, the department will move to cancel the transfer. We will discuss later in this presentation additional information about timelines and about the completion of the timeline portion of the claim form. In the next section, we will provide some tips, reminders, and examples to aid in the completion of the claim of beneficial use materials. As part of this discussion, we will cover the following topics: permit amendments, fees, signatures, variations, calculations, conditions and extensions, and finally, mapping. Permit amendments. A permit amendment is a process used to amend either the location of a point of diversion or appropriation and/or the place of use of a permit. No other changes can be considered under a permit amendment. These are processed by our transfer section and therefore are assigned a transfer number or T number. It is important to note that although we have designated a transfer number for the purpose of tracking the request, that this type of change is not a transfer. Under our current process, a superseding permit is issued to capture the approved changes to the permit. In completing a claim for a permit that has been amended, you will select the claim form from the list of claims for permits, not transfers. Fees. Not all claims for transfers require a fee. In order to determine whether a fee will be required for the submittal of the transfer claim, you must look at the priority date of the rights involved in the transfer. As previously mentioned, in order to determine whether a fee will be required for the submittal of a claim for a transfer, you must identify the priority dates of the rights modified by the transfer. If the rights have a priority date prior to July 9th of 1987, no fee will be required. For example, a transfer involves 5 rights with priority dates of 1890, 1900, 1905, 1920, and 1965. All of these rights have priority dates that predate July 9th of 1987. As such, no fee would be required to submit the claim for this transfer. Now, Let's discuss a situation where a fee would be required in order to submit a claim. If we have a transfer that involves a right with a priority date of July 9th of 1987 or later, or to say that differently, a right with a priority date of July 9th of 1987 or more recent, a fee would be required in order to submit the claim. As of July 1st of 2021, the claim filing fee is $230. Here is an example. A transfer involves 5 water rights with priority dates of 1890, 1900, 1905, 1920, and 2015. Because one of these rights has a priority date after July 9th of 1987, a fee would be required to submit the claim. Signatures are another important element of a claim of beneficial use. A claim is required to be signed by each transfer holder of record. When the department receives a claim that is not signed by the proper parties, the claim is returned for correction. The following slides will discuss the signature page and the requirements for signature of both the certified water right examiner and the transfer holders. The claim form requires 2 sets of signatures. The first is that of the water right examiner. The water right examiner is required to both stamp and sign the claim. The second signature is that of the transfer holder or transfer holders of record. In some cases, there may be a receiving landowner that will need to sign the claim. Missing signatures or incorrect signatures are the #1 reason for the return of a claim for correction. It is important to make sure that you, the water right examiner, have both stamped and signed the signature page, and that you've ensured that the proper parties have also signed the claim. When the claim is for a trust, business, corporation, district, municipality, or other similar entity, be sure to include the title of the individual signing the claim. Examples of titles would include trustee, owner, manager, president, mayor, etc. A few things to look for when determining who needs to sign the claim. A transfer may be the name of a single person, such as Mr. Smith. In the case of a single individual, the claim only needs to be signed by a single transfer holder of record, in this case, Mr. Smith. A transfer may also be in the name of multiple people, such as Mr. and Mrs. Smith. In this case, both Mr. and Mrs. Smith are transfer holders and both must sign the claim. A transfer may also be in the name of multiple people and a corporation, such as Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Northwest Farm Credit Services. In this case, the claim would need to be signed by all 3 parties, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, and a representative of Northwest Farm Credit Services. In the final example, the keyword is or. A transfer may be in the name of multiple people, such as Mr. or Mrs. Smith. In this case, because the transfer was issued to either Mr. or Mrs. Smith, only one of them would need to sign the claim. The key word is or. To ensure that you're gathering the correct signatures, check RIS to see who the department lists as the current transfer holder or holders of record. Our current practice is to place scanned images of the assignment materials and assignment confirmation letters into the RIS record for the transfer. The images can be found in the Scanned Images tab. If the property has changed hands, it may be necessary to file an extension either prior to or concurrent with the claim. In cases where a transfer is issued to multiple transfer holders, you may find it necessary to file a claim for an individual who owns a portion of the transfer rather than a claim for the entire transfer. If you submit a claim for a portion of a transfer, the claim must clearly identify what portion is included in the claim, and it must also identify the excluded property owner or owners who own lands covered by the transfer that are not included in the claim. In the case of a partial claim, the claim would only need to be signed by the transfer holder of record for the portion of the transfer covered by the claim. It is important that the water right examiner provide a description of any variations from what was authorized under the transfer to what was developed. It is as important to know what changes were completed as to those that were not. Here are a few examples of how variations may be described on the claim form. The order allowed 3 new points of diversion. The water user only developed one of the points. A second example, the order authorized a change in place of use for 40 acres. The water user only developed 38 acres. And finally, the order authorized changes in character of use to industrial, commercial, and livestock. The water user did not develop the commercial use. In discussing variations, this would be where the examiner could also identify possible Scrivener's errors in the transfer final order. In this next series of slides, we will discuss the specific information requested in the claim to describe new or additional points of diversion or appropriation. It is important to provide as much of the information as is available. However, you may find yourself in a situation where you are unable to locate pieces of information requested. In those cases, you can make a note that the information was not available. For example, the new owner of a property may not know the serial number of a pump, or the plate that's typically located on the pump that provides the information about the manufacturer, model, serial number may not be available. Here, you can see the information that is requested for a pump. The claim requests very specific information about the pump, including the manufacturer, the model, the serial number, and the pump type, whether it's centrifugal or turbine, and the intake and discharge sizes. The claim also asks for information necessary to compute the theoretical capacity of the pump. Theoretical calculations of the pump capacity are required even if you're able to read a measurement at the time of the inspection. Here, you can see the information that is requested for a gravity flow pipe. The claim requests very specific information about the pipe, including the size, the type, the C factor, the length of the pipe, the amount of fall, and slope. The C factor is obtained from a chart and describes the amount of friction associated with a given pipe type or material. This information will provide the necessary elements to compute the theoretical capacity of the pipe. Theoretical calculations of the pipe are required even if you're able to read a measurement device at the time of the inspection. Here, you can see the information that is requested for a gravity flow ditch or canal. The claim requests specific information about the canal or ditch, including the width, depth, ditch material type, the in factor, the length of the ditch, the amount of fall, and the slope. The in factor is obtained from a chart and describes the amount of friction associated with a given ditch type or material. This information will provide the necessary elements to compute the theoretical capacity of the ditch or canal. Again, theoretical calculations of the ditch are required even if you're able to read a measurement device at the time of the inspection. Let's move on to the conditions section of the claim. In this section of the claim, it is important to address each condition of the transfer. Here is a list of the most common conditions you will find included on transfers. Conditions related to the time limits, measurement devices, fish protection devices, possibly well ID tags, and then other conditions which may include well construction related conditions or possibly specific riparian restoration conditions. The form is set up to prompt the water right examiner to address each of these possible conditions. It is important to fully describe the steps the transfer holder has taken to timely comply with each condition of the transfer. This section is where the examiner will document that both the timely use of water and timely compliance with conditions were made. As we discussed earlier, it is important that the claim document the timely completion of the authorized change or changes occurred and that timely compliance with conditions also occurred under the transfer. The next series of slides will present a few different scenarios related to the completion of the time limits portion of the claim form. Each of the two scenarios will be presented to give you the opportunity to first determine what the problem is. Then we will provide you with a description of the problem and finally a solution given the scenario. The first scenario is a situation where a transfer was issued authorizing a new point of diversion and a new place of use. The transfer was issued on September 5th of 2019 and had a completion date of October 1st of 2020. Can you spot the problem? Here is the problem. The new point of diversion, the installation of the required totalizing flow meter, and irrigation of the new lands all occurred after the completion date required in the transfer final order. What is the solution? In this case, the solution is to file a transfer extension of time so that a new completion date can be obtained to capture the actual date that the new point of diversion, the installation of the totalizing flow meter, and irrigation of the new lands occurred. Without the approval of an extension of time, beneficial use was not completed under this transfer. Here is the second scenario. In this scenario, a transfer was issued authorizing a change in place of use. The transfer was issued on September 5th of 2018. The transfer required that the change be completed by October 1st of 2019. Can you spot the problem? Here is the problem. Although the new place of use was timely irrigated, the required totalizing flow meter was installed after the completion date of the transfer final order. As you can see, the completion date of the transfer was October 1st of 2019. The totalizing flow meter was installed in July of 2020. What is the solution? In this case, file a transfer extension of time to obtain a new completion date to capture the actual date that the required totalizing flow meter was installed. Many transfers now require the installation of some type of measurement device. The language in the measurement device condition has changed over the years. Some transfer final orders, especially newer ones, are explicit in requiring a totalizing flow meter, where other transfers, generally ones issued several years ago, are more generic, indicating that maybe only a meter needs to be installed. In cases where the language is specific as to the type of meter that is required, that type of meter must be installed. If the transfer, for example, requires a totalizing flow meter, that would be the specific type of meter that must be installed. In cases where the language is more generic in nature, only requiring a meter, for example, a variety of meters would satisfy the condition. Examples of acceptable meters in this case would include a dedicated electrical meter, an instantaneous flow meter, a totalizing flow meter, and possibly an hour meter on a generator. It is important to read the condition for the measurement condition carefully. Many of the conditions include a clause regarding the installation of some other approved measurement device. In these cases, a transfer holder could approach their local water master with a plan to use some other device. The device would need to be timely installed and approved by the watermaster in writing. As previously mentioned, it is important to read the measurement device condition carefully in order to determine what type of device is required. As it relates to other suitable measurement devices, the device must be approved by the watermaster. Here is an example of where a request for some other suitable measurement device may be necessary. A transfer that requires a meter for a reservoir that is located on channel. Since it is highly unlikely that a meter could be installed, the transfer holder could work with their local watermaster to determine what type of device would be acceptable. It may be that a staff gauge or staff plate would be the appropriate device. The watermaster can provide the transfer holder with written approval of the staff gauge or staff plate. The device must be timely installed in order to comply with the condition. Flow restrictors. You may see a condition in some domestic or human consumption water use transfers that require the installation of a flow restrictor. The claim will need to describe the device and when it was installed. In addition, if the transfer specifically called out the installation of the flow restrictor, the watermaster would not need to approve it. If a measurement device is required by the transfer final order, it is critical that the claim provide the date that the device was installed. As it relates to fish protection devices, such as fish screens, bypass devices, and fish passage, these will typically require that ODFW inspect and approve the device or waive the requirement. Some older permits and transfers may still qualify to self-certify the required fish screen. To qualify, the diversion point must be pumped, the developed capacity of the pump must be less than 225 gallons per minute, and the permit or transfer final order must have been issued prior to February 1st of 2011. All permits or transfers issued on or after February 1st of 2011 that require a fish screen will require that the screen be inspected and approved, or that the requirement for the screen be waived by ODFW. Newer transfers involving groundwater may contain a condition requiring the water user to both assign and permanently attach a well ID tag to a well prior to any use of water from that well. Additional information about the well identification program can be found on the department's website by selecting the link under the Groundwater and Wells Program topic on our homepage. Now that we have completed our discussion about the claim form, we will now move on to discuss the Claim of Beneficial Use map. In this section, we will provide some tips, reminders, and examples to aid in the preparation of the claim map. Here is a list of some common mapping issues that we've identified. The first, maps not being submitted on polyester film. The rules require that the map be on polyester film, not on paper. The second is Scrivener's errors in the application, permit, certificate, or transfer number that are referenced on the map. The third, Scrivener's errors in the township, range, and section. And finally, Scrivener's errors in the coordinates for points of diversion or appropriation that are identified on the map. Here are some additional mapping issues. Measurement devices not being identified on the map as required, fish protection devices not identified on the map, donation land claims and government lots not identified, and acreages not designated within projected quarters within those donation land claims and government lots. Finally, maps not at an authorized scale without an approved waiver request. Different department processes have different requirements as it relates to the description of a point of diversion or point of appropriation. For the purpose of a claim of beneficial use, there are only two that are acceptable. The first being bearing and distance from a recognized land survey corner, and the second being coordinates, such as a distance north or south and a distance east or west from a recognized land survey corner. In addition to bearing and distance, or coordinates, the mapping standards for both permit application maps and claim of beneficial use maps allow for additional location information to be included on the map. The map may also include location coordinate information that the applicant may wish to provide, including latitude and longitude as established by a global positioning system. For additional mapping standards for claims of beneficial use, please refer to our Division 14 rules and our Division 310 rules. The mapping requirements for transfer application maps differ from those of a map for an application for a permit or a claim of beneficial use map. For transfer map requirements, refer to the transfer rules located in Division 380. A claim map that only provides latitude and longitude as established by a global positioning system to describe the location of a point of diversion or point of appropriation will be returned for updating. Here is a question that is occasionally raised. On a claim of beneficial use map, should the location of a point of diversion or point of appropriation be described using cardinal directions or as a description along section, donation land claim, quarter, or government lot lines? Although not specifically stated in our rules, the rules appear to indicate that cardinal directions should be used. The four cardinal directions, or cardinal points, are the four main points of a compass: north, south, east, and west. East and west being perpendicular or at right angles to north and south. As a warning, you may encounter water right maps that describe a point of diversion or point of appropriation without the use of cardinal directions. The claim map is required to include the location of government lots and donation land claims if they are applicable. When irrigation occurs within a government lot or donation land claim, the projected quarter lines should be imposed over the lot or claim, and the number of irrigated acres within each of these projected quarters should be indicated. The department realizes that the quarters do not really exist in these cases, but due to the method in which water rights are tracked, it is essential that the acres within the projected quarters be included on the claim map. To aid in the review of your claim map, please feel free to include a copy of the maps you used for your section layout. Copies of the Government Land Office records can be found on the Bureau of Land Management's website at this address. Here is an example of a cadastral survey that identifies both government lots and donation land claims. On the screen, you will see that Claim 43 is identified and that several other donation land claims are also located within this township. Here is the same cadastral survey. On the screen, you will see that several government lots are noted and many others are located within this township. If you are preparing the claim map for a transfer that involves multiple rights, especially for irrigation, each right must be clearly identified. A separate crosshatch pattern for each right is recommended. The acreages for each right must be indicated on the map as a separate figure, not as a combined total of all the irrigated acres within the quarter. There are several reasons that this is important. Each of the rights may have their own priority date. Each right may have a different source. And finally, upon the issuance of a certificate issued to confirm the change, we need to be able to match the acres on the certificate to the acres on the map. The Division 14 rules require that the claim map identify the locations of both fish protection devices and measurement devices in relationship to the point of diversion or the point of appropriation. There are several ways that this can be accomplished. If the required device or devices are located at the point of diversion or appropriation, a single symbol can be used to identify the point of diversion or appropriation, along with a description in the map legend indicating what is located at the point of diversion, such as POD with fish screen and meter, or POA with meter. Another option is to have a separate symbol for the point of diversion or appropriation, the meter or measuring device, and the fish screen. Separate symbols work well in cases where the measuring devices and/or fish screens are not located at the point of diversion or appropriation. A final option in cases where the measuring device and/or fish screen are not located at the point of diversion or appropriation is to provide the location of the measurement or fish protection device in relationship to the point of diversion or appropriation. For example, the fish screen is located 50 feet north of the POD, or the meter is located 100 feet east of the POA. The following two slides show examples of how CWREs have captured the location of fish screens and measurement devices on their maps. Here is an example where a CWRE has indicated the location of a point of diversion with a symbol and then has provided additional notes to document that at POD2 there is a pump with a fish screen. Here is an example where a CWRE has indicated the location of a well, point of appropriation, with a symbol and then has provided an additional note to document that a meter is located at the well. Thank you for viewing this presentation on transfer claims of beneficial use. Here is a summary of some of the main points we covered related to the claim form. Claims for transfers only need to describe the change that was authorized under the transfer final order. The completion of a change for a transfer involves both the timely completion of the change along with the timely compliance to the conditions of the transfer final order. The claim must address all conditions of the transfer final order. Here are some additional points we covered related to the claim form. Claim forms can be found on our Forms page. The Forms page can be accessed from the department's homepage by clicking on the menu item titled Forms. In order to file the claim, and to ensure that all the proper parties have signed the claim form, it may be necessary to complete an assignment. And finally, always download the most current version of the claim form when beginning a new project. Here is a summary of some of the main points we covered related to the claim map. The map must be prepared on polyester film. The map must include government lots, donation land claims, or home entry surveys. The map must identify the tax lots both by the unique tax lot number and location. If you need a different map scale, request a waiver. Here are some additional points we covered related to the claim map. The map must include the location of any required fish protection devices. The map must include the location of any required measurement devices. And finally, the map must differentiate between the various rights involved in the transfer and, if necessary, also by different priority dates and different sources. If you have any additional questions about claims of beneficial use, please feel free to contact any of us in the certificate section.